Good morning, everyone. It's great to see all of you here, and thank you very much for coming to attend our forum here. So this morning I want to spend a little bit of time following up on the talks that you already heard, talking about this innovative transformation that is starting to happen across our industry, and specifically about how our industries are becoming increasingly digital across every single thing that we do. And how do we start to consider those kinds of transformations ourselves as we think about both the roles that our companies start to play across this transition, as well as what we do as IT executives and leaders within our organizations about facilitating that transformation. Now, as you take a look at these four companies, we've already heard a little bit about transformation, but what do we think that these four companies have in common? Well, first off, these are all digital-first companies. Facebook has only been around since 2004, so relatively new across the industry. But they are having already massive, massive effects in terms of transforming how we need to do business across very, very traditional industries. And they're emblematic of the kinds of changes that are happening across everything that we do today. If we think about Uber in the taxi industry, Uber is now the world's largest taxi company, but it doesn't own any of its own vehicles. All the value that it provides is in the digital realm. Similarly around Facebook, Facebook is the world's largest content owner, but it produces none of its own content. All of its value is in the digital interaction it connects with users. If we think about Alibaba, Alibaba is now the world's largest retailer, and it doesn't control or own any of its own inventory. Again, all the value it provides is the digital connection between it and its own suppliers, as well as the end users of its services. And then you take a look at Airbnb. Airbnb is now the world's largest hoteling organization, but it doesn't own any of its own real estate. Again, a very traditional industry, but all the value has moved into the digital realm. And so as we think about all these traditional industries, and we are not exempt in any business that we're in, the question becomes, how do we make this transition to digital? Because if we don't start offering new value to our customers, the risk for us is that our customers and our competitors will start to come into this space and focus on different kinds of offerings. We become irrelevant and we die. But the opportunity for us, on the other hand, is that there's all sorts of new business opportunities where if we can successfully make this transition to becoming increasingly digital, we can create tremendous new selling opportunities and tremendous new opportunities for us to grow our businesses. So I want to spend a little bit of time today talking about what are the kinds of things that we need to do in order to affect this kind of transformation. Now, as we think about how do we become increasingly digital and offer this new kind of value, there's three particular key areas that become foundational for how do we make this transition from being a traditional business towards being a digital business. And that's around mobile, around IoT, and around cloud. Now, mobile is really important because what mobile provides is the digital touch point for how you will interact with your users and how you will interact with your customers. I bet all of you here already have phones in your pocket. Here in Korea, you guys have the most advanced mobile communications network in the world, and all of you are hopefully using that to tweet and take pictures, hopefully not to check your email. But this is how your users want to interact with you as you go forward. It's across your mobile devices, and if you don't deliver that kind of experience, you're not going to be relevant. IoT, Internet of Things. This is how you're going to connect your analog business to the digital world. As you take all these physical devices, physical locations, physical assets, and even physical analog people, and how do we start to convert them into digital interfaces and connect them into this new world that we live in? IoT is going to be the transformational technology that allows us to do that. And finally, cloud. Cloud is where we're going to run our digital business of the future. As we think about all these new applications and workloads and services that we have to deliver, the cloud is what's going to be powering all these new capabilities as we move forward. So I want to spend a little bit of time talking about each of these three trends around mobile, around IoT, around cloud, and how do we get there. Now, the first thing at a high level is that if you want to move into these new areas, you are going to have to adopt open source. Open source is fundamentally driving all the new innovation that's happening across the entire technology industry. Yes, around mobile, around IoT, and around cloud, but around everything else that's going on as well. Everything from big data to storage technologies to networking technologies and so on. When you take a look at where all the new innovation is happening, as you make a transition towards being a digital enterprise, you are going to have to adopt open source technologies because that is where all the new stuff is being created. If you don't adopt open source, you cannot adopt these new technologies. They go hand in hand. And so one of the things that I want to explore with you today is how do we make this transition to being a digital enterprise across mobile, IoT, and cloud? But more importantly, what are the open source technologies that are shaping how these things evolve, and how can you start to take advantage of them? And we'll take a look at some examples. So let's dive into that now, starting with mobile. Now, mobile has obviously transformed the world in just a few short years. It's only been since 2007 that the very first iPhone appeared and started to transform the industry. And now, of course, Android and iOS and other devices have taken over the market in terms of how we interact with our customers. Now, from an enterprise standpoint, when you start taking a look at the adoption of mobile, there's huge gains to be won as you start to implement these capabilities in your own businesses. And that primarily cuts down into two categories. First off, you can measure the direct effects of implementing mobile services in terms of what your customers do with you as a business. That translates into both fundamentally and dramatically better customer satisfaction because you're offering services in the way that your customers want to experience them, but it also helps drive the bottom line. You can drive significantly more revenue. In fact, as you take a look at enterprises who've implemented new mobile technologies, they typically find on average about 19% increase in revenue from a services standpoint, as well as 13% new business that they're doing as a result of implementing mobile technologies. But it doesn't just stop there. Enterprises can also help their bottom line because putting mobile technologies in place for your own workers dramatically increases the productivity of what you're able to do. Think about all the time that's saved in terms of eliminating different processes, in terms of having your workers be so much more productive and having instant access to all their information. And so putting mobile in place revolutionizes how you interact with your customers, but also how you interact with your own workers. And this is the first transition that you have to make in terms of becoming a digital business. This is the way that your customers want to engage with you. This is how your workers are going to be better and more productive workers. And so how do you do that from an enterprise standpoint? Well, if you're going to start to develop mobile applications in a traditional enterprise, there's a few things that you need to start considering from a use case and from a requirement standpoint. The first big change that we have to make as an IT industry is that we have to fundamentally change the nature of how we create our applications in our enterprise software business. Now think about the typical release cycle of an enterprise application. You deploy it today, you log into your web browser on your laptop, and that software gets updated maybe once a year, maybe once every 18 months. And compare that to how quickly your software updates every single day on your phone. Multiple software updates a day, even within the same application, maybe once a week you get a new feature, a new release of that application. That means you are going to have to fundamentally change the way you build these applications and release them into this new mobile world because that's what your customers expect. And that drives a whole bunch of different changes that your new mobile application platforms have to support. You've got to be able to create applications in a very rapid and agile manner. You've also got to be able to increase the efficiency of how you operate your own data center services to be able to support these new mobile workloads. Traditionally, if you're just serving users who access your applications in a browser on a laptop, then they're going to generate a certain amount of traffic and require a certain number of capabilities in your back-end data center. Mobile is going to explode the requirements that you need to provide because now your users are interacting with you on a continuous basis. They're generating so much more traffic against your servers. They're generating new kinds of requests that you haven't managed before. And so you're going to have to retool and expand from an operational efficiency standpoint, how do we get much more capacity? How do we become much more responsive? And how do we become much more secure from a data center standpoint as we support these new mobile environments? You're going to have to put in place new IT capabilities, such as DevOps, because as you marry these new capabilities of bringing applications to market quickly, as you marry these new operational capabilities, they're going to have to come together and work in ways that they haven't before. And so your IT organization is going to have to change the way that it operates as you introduce these new mobile applications into your environment. And then finally, you're going to have to get used to delivering a new kind of user experience across these applications. You can't just take a traditional website, wrap it in a mobile shell, and your customers are going to be happy. So you're going to have to design for new experiences and new capabilities as you architect these mobile applications. This is the way that your customers want to experience your capabilities, and this is what Red Hat has been focused on delivering with open source as well. Now at Red Hat, we offer our mobile application platform, which addresses all those different enterprise requirements that I spoke to you about in terms of how do we deliver mobile applications to our customers. First off, it provides everything that you need in your back-end data center to power these new mobile applications. It provides all sorts of new services, such as native capabilities for how do I do push notifications, geographic location, and all the higher-level primitives I need to write my applications in. For designing the applications that actually go to your handheld devices, you can write your code once and deploy it to Android, to iOS, to Windows, and other form factors, all with the push of a button. And finally, we provide an integrated workspace so that your developers and your operations teams and designers can all collaborate in a very rich way to be able to create these applications very quickly and get them to market. Now, one of the things that we're really excited about is that earlier this summer at our Red Hat Summit, we announced a strategic partnership with Samsung. Now, Samsung is obviously a very important organization here in Korea, but they are also the largest handset manufacturer in the world. And what Samsung and Red Hat announced is that Samsung is now strategically adopting the Red Hat mobile application platform as they build new applications for enterprises. And so as Samsung starts to build out and help enterprises adopt mobile applications on their devices, they will be using Red Hat software to power every single one of those workloads. And this is going to be tremendous for helping you adopt these mobile applications by taking advantage of the software capabilities we deliver at Red Hat and the enterprise and hardware devices that Samsung brings to the table. Now, I want to talk a little bit in terms of what are actual customers doing as they start to transition towards this new digital future. Now, I'm going to give you an example in a very traditional industry, the healthcare industry in the US. Now, this is a company called Bay State Health. They're one of our large healthcare providers in my home state of Massachusetts in the US. And they wanted to digitize their capabilities by providing mobile applications to be able to support how they interacted with their doctors as well as with their patients. And they did this by writing 2 new applications on top of Red Hat's application platform. First off, for all their doctors and healthcare providers, they wanted to help their doctors become much more responsive in terms of how could they treat their patients and much more intelligent in terms of how do they actually prescribe the correct treatment. So they built a new mobile application for healthcare providers and doctors so that when they saw patients, the patient's entire medical history and information, as well as other relevant diagnostic tools, would be available immediately on his phone for him to interact with. Makes the doctor much more productive and much more interactive in terms of how he can service his patient. And it's really improved the quality of care. But the other thing that they also provided was a new mobile application for all their patients. And this was an application where a patient could go ahead and take a picture of himself and an injury that he might have sustained, and submit that in a safe and secure fashion to his doctor for a remote diagnosis. Now, this is really helpful because if you sustain an injury, if you're sick in the middle of the night, now you don't have to make a trip to the emergency room. You can just take your phone, show the doctor what is your situation, and get remote diagnosis okay, this is your situation. You don't need to make a trip in to see the doctor. We can wait a couple days, and this is what you should do in the meantime. Or, this is actually something serious, you better come over right now. But it makes the patient have much richer access to treatment and make much better choices. And so introducing these digital capabilities through mobile touchpoints is transforming how we are starting to deliver even in a traditional enterprise like healthcare. And so that's the first transformation that's taking place across our industry. Mobile is how we need to interact with our customers in this new digital era, because this is how everyone wants to do it, and we are starting to drive that now via open source technologies. But if you think mobile is big, and everyone here has mobile handsets in their pocket, as I mentioned before, that is nothing compared to the kind of transformation that is going to take place through IoT. Now, there's two data points here that I want to share with you. On the left here, you see the growth of population of both humans as well as internet-connected devices and things over the next 5 years. And as you can see, by the year 2020, we expect the total human population to be about 9 billion people. In that same amount of time, we expect the amount of internet-connected devices and things to be around 25 billion. A huge, huge growth, and much larger than the entire human population. And that is going to transform the way that we use the internet and digital services, because people are no longer going to be the primary design point and end user of digital services. It's going to be machines. And that's going to require a different way in terms of how we think about creating applications and services. The second thing, you'll notice that there was a report that came out earlier this year by the consulting firm McKinsey. And they project that in the next 10 years, we are going to create so much new market opportunity and wealth that by 2025, the size of the IoT market is going to be around 11.1 trillion US dollars. That is a staggeringly large number. It's hard to get your head around. In fact, that's like creating almost 2 new Chinas from an overall GDP standpoint of new wealth and new market opportunity as we take a look at the transition towards IoT. Now, why is so much excitement around this space? Why is there going to be such new economic development? It's because IoT is the way that we connect our analog business today to the new digital future. And everyone is going to have to participate in this digital economy. And so we're looking at a total transformation about how every single organization does business, because we need to be able to connect everything that we do in the physical world to the digital space. And as we do that, that is going to transform every single industry that we participate in. Now, from an enterprise standpoint, as you think about how do we start to implement IoT capabilities within our own organization, there's an architecture that is starting to emerge in terms of best practices of how we start to deploy IoT. Now, this is what that architecture looks like. It's a 3-tier architecture. And starting at the bottom, we see all these different devices. Now, the devices are the things that actually are the physical things that are digitally connected. And they can include things like your mobile handsets, but all sorts of new things that are also digitally connected. Things like automobiles and airplanes and railroads, different diagnostic tools within hospitals, smart energy grids and smart cities that are all connected to the internet and so on. All these things that we place physical sensors on are going to start collecting information and generating tremendous data. Now, the second thing that we need to deploy as part of our overall IoT architecture then is something that can deal with all these different devices, that can collect all the data that they generate, that can provide some automated response to what these devices do. And that's where these gateways come in. A gateway is like a small computer that I can place in close physical proximity to all the different devices that I'm deploying. And it's important to have a gateway, because what a gateway allows you to do is to provide real-time response to all these different devices. Because it's in close physical proximity, I can immediately understand all the data that's being generated. I can store it, I can collect it, and I make an intelligent business decision on what is that data telling me to do. Similarly, once I've collected all that information, my gateway can aggregate it and send it back into my data center or cloud for long-term connection to my business, for long-term analytics in terms of what should I do from a market projection standpoint. And so this is the overall architecture that people are starting to implement as they look at IoT in the enterprise. Now I want to zoom in on this gateway because this is sort of a little bit of a new thing that's part of IoT. You know, we have devices today, we have data centers today already, but gateways are a relatively new technology. Now, remember that healthcare example that I gave you earlier in terms of how they were implementing mobile technologies. Think about the impact on a hospital that IoT is going to introduce. Now, if you're in a hospital environment and you have all sorts of connected medical equipment, treating your patients, collecting information, making decisions about what kind of treatment to make available, what would happen if that device was connected to the internet, to a cloud service, and your internet connection went down? You don't want to lose the ability to treat your patients. What happens if your internet connection becomes saturated and too slow? You can't afford to have critical health care not be delivered because of your internet connection. That's why it's so important to place in close physical proximity a server that is connected to these devices so we can have immediate real-time response and immediate real-time automation for what we do based on the information that is coming from these devices. Now, a gateway has to provide a few sets of critical functionality. First, it's got to be able to communicate with these devices, speaking a lot of these very lightweight, machine-oriented protocols. It's got to be able to take all that information and store it on your server. Then it has to be able to analyze the data and provide automation in terms of what should I do in response to all the data that I've collected. And finally, it needs to be able to aggregate that information and send it back to your data center and to your cloud so you can connect it to the rest of your business. And Red Hat provides a complete software set of capabilities to implement everything that you need on your gateway. We have our operating system, of course, to power it. We have our messaging software like AMQ, which can speak these device protocols like MQTT and communicate with your devices. We can store and aggregate that data on things like Red Hat Storage and with our data virtualization technologies. We can provide automated intelligence in terms of what should we do with our business rules management systems. And then we can connect all that data back to your data center with our integration technologies like JBoss Fuse. And so Red Hat provides everything that you need to implement these gateways as part of an overall enterprise IoT footprint. Now, I want to talk about another very traditional enterprise and industry that has been transforming to a digital business using open source technologies. In this case, this is the railroad industry. Now, if you think about the industrial era, there's probably no industry that is more emblematic of industrialization than the railroads. Now, in the US, a few years ago, we passed a law that every single railroad would have to implement a system called positive train control, or PTC. And positive train control is basically a system so that if a train is coming too fast around a track, or if it's approaching a station too quickly, we can A, monitor all the information on that train to understand the speed and navigation and what's going on, and B, we can send a remote signal to the train to tell it to stop and slow down to avoid an accident. We had passed this law because there was a few catastrophic accidents in the US where trains came in too quickly and collided with another train at a station, causing massive deaths and injuries. Now, there's a company in the US called MeteorCom, which is a collaboration across all the railroads across the US, and they are the organization responsible for implementing positive train control in the US. And they are doing this entirely on an open source platform provided by Red Hat. First, across every single train and across every single station, they're putting in a software stack comprised of Red Hat Enterprise Linux and Red Hat's middleware software to provide the ability to analyze and communicate with the navigation systems on the train, as well as the ability to go over the railroad industry's wireless networks and provide secure and reliable communication between each device so that they can send these remote control signals and that they can communicate with each other. And this is all designed to prevent accidents. And the reason that they worked with Red Hat is that they needed to depend upon our enterprise reliability even as they started to leverage these open source technologies. In fact, we're very proud of the fact that we've been able to deliver a 99.999% service level agreement as a result of our software in place because, again, we're trying to prevent catastrophic train accidents. We cannot afford for the system to go down. And so they have been digitizing a very traditional industry in the railroad by making smart trains and smart stations so that they can digitally communicate with each other to prevent accidents. IoT is how you connect your analog business, even trains, to the digital world. That's the second transformation. Now let's talk about the third pillar, which is cloud computing. And cloud is where you are going to run your digital business as you go forward. And the reason for that is only the cloud provides the efficiency and the agility and the scalability as well as the cost effectiveness to be able to power all these next generation services that you're going to need to run across your mobile and IoT and other workloads. So let's take a look at how you can start to do that in your own enterprise. First off, as you start to take a look at cloud computing, Openstack is the foundation for how you start to implement a cloud platform. Openstack is a very popular software project that the entire industry has standardized on for how do you introduce cloud computing capabilities into your own data center. It provides three key sets of capabilities. The first is that it can work with thousands and tens of thousands of servers and aggregate them together to provide very, very efficient capabilities in terms of how do I run workloads and how do I provision them. Instead of taking weeks or months to be able to construct software infrastructure, now I can do that in a few minutes. Second thing that Openstack provides is a programmable set of interfaces that I can build against so that I can construct these interfaces on the fly via things like self-service portals or through other management tools and even programming scripts. And Openstack presents all sorts of open interfaces and projects that you can start to build against to be able to program. How do I construct my compute? How do I construct my storage? How do I construct my network? All on the fly in a very efficient way. And the third capability that Openstack provides is a foundational platform that I can plug in high-level services that I want to run across my cloud. Things like databases or firewalls or security software and so on. Openstack provides all the foundational interfaces and services to be able to integrate all these capabilities so that you can run all these next generation capabilities on top of a very flexible cloud platform. And Red Hat provides the Red Hat Enterprise Linux Openstack platform as our way to deliver these capabilities to the market. But it's not enough just to have Openstack. You also need to be able to run applications on top of that cloud platform. And one of the technologies that has caught on fire over the last year and a half or so is containers, especially around Docker technology and technologies like Kubernetes in terms of how do we wire all these containers together. Because what containers provide is the opportunity to build a next generation application architecture which can run very well across the cloud. And the way that you can do this is to be able to take your traditional applications and decompose them into what people are calling microservice architectures. Now, a microservice allows you to take that traditional application, database, application tier, web tier, and decompose that so you have lots and lots of individual microservices, each running within a Docker container on top of Linux. And then we orchestrate how all these containers work together around an application. And the reason this is such a powerful application architecture in the cloud is that it allows us to spin up these applications very quickly. It allows us to scale these applications horizontally. If I need to grow my application, I just spin up new containers. And guess what? The cloud is better than any other platform at spinning up new infrastructure services to host these containers as they run. And so containers and microservice architectures allow us to build a new application that is optimized to run across this OpenStack cloud footprint. And Red Hat provides a complete set of capabilities to be able to run these new containerized applications in your cloud as well. First off, we have Red Hat Enterprise Linux, which includes native support for Docker container technologies. On top of that, we have a Red Hat Enterprise Atomic Platform, which includes the ability to scale out your container infrastructure to very, very large footprints. It includes Docker, technologies like Kubernetes for container orchestration, as well as a number of other technologies to help us scale that out in a very meaningful way. Then on top of that, we have our OpenShift platform as a service, which gives our developers new tools to create these cloud applications, as well as your operations teams the ability to take these next generation cloud applications and deploy them into production. And then finally, we have our Cloud Suite for Applications, which integrates all these capabilities and adds management from products such as CloudForms and Satellite, so that now I can take these workloads and run and operate them as we go forward. And this is all a big part of Red Hat's overall open hybrid cloud strategy and platform. On the right, you see all the products and technologies that Red Hat has, which I just spoke about, the things that allow you to build these next generation clouds, next generation applications with containers and microservices, and to be able to manage them. But I have to be able to bridge these new clouds into my existing IT environment. And that's what all the products on the left-hand side of the chart show. We can come into your existing IT environment and modernize everything that you're doing with open source technologies. You can go from Unix to Linux. You can go from vSphere to open source Red Hat Enterprise Virtualization. I can go from Oracle middleware to JBoss technologies. That allows me to do two things. First, it allows me to get a much more modern and agile platform in place, taking advantage of open source innovation. But it also allows me to save tremendous cost because of the value that open source delivers, so I can start to pay for all that new innovation that you see on the right. And Red Hat can bridge these two worlds together because they all share the same underlying open source piece parts. So now we can bridge everything you're doing in your existing environment, as well as these new clouds, and deploy them across a diverse set of platforms. Your choice of physical, your choice of virtual, your choice of private cloud, your choice of public cloud technologies. This is Red Hat's vision for an open hybrid cloud. Now let me talk about another very traditional industry that has been digitizing their business with open source and with Red Hat. In this case, this is in the travel industry with a company, Amadeus. Amadeus is one of the globe's largest travel organizations. They do about 1.6 billion requests a day across all their different travel properties, and they process about 500 million travel bookings per year. So massive, massive business. And Amadeus needed to be able to start providing new cloud services for their customers because they needed to power all these next generation applications that their customers were demanding. How do we offer capabilities with software as a service and mobile applications and new experiences from a digital travel bookings standpoint? And as Amadeus made this transition towards the cloud, they did this on top of Red Hat and open source. And in particular, one of the key components of this was our OpenShift platform as a service, because Amadeus really wanted to build containers and microservices to power their next generation set of applications. Now, one of the really interesting things that Amadeus did was not only are they a customer of Red Hat to obtain these technologies, but they have been participating in the open source communities around things like Kubernetes as well. In fact, Amadeus is one of the leading contributors to the open source Kubernetes container orchestration project. And so Amadeus has been saying, we need these new features in these open source technologies to satisfy our use cases, so we will contribute them. And then Red Hat takes those contributors and we turn them into products, which then Amadeus buys from us in return to get stability and support. And this is how Amadeus is able to power all these new travel capabilities across its cloud as it digitizes the travel business. So we've spoken about these three different areas that you need to start to adopt as from a digital standpoint. Mobile, because it's how you start to interact with your customers. IoT, because it's how you connect your analog business to the digital world. And cloud, because that is where you power your digital business. But if it takes you 5 years or 7 years to make that transition to adopt all these things, that is going to be way too long and you're going to be way too late, because your customers are not going to wait for you to make that transition. Your competitors are not going to sit around and waiting for you to be able to make that transition, and there's going to be brand new digital first companies that are going to try to disrupt you. And so how do you start to make that transition to these new digital opportunities with tremendous speed, but still preserving quality? You're going to have a new IT approach. And this is where DevOps comes in. The industry has started to focus on DevOps as a way for how do we start to deliver software capabilities much more quickly and with better reliability. There was another McKinsey study that came out recently which took a look at software projects on average. And what it found was that software projects are on average, when you deliver them within the enterprise, about 45% over budget and 7% late. The only reason that they're only 7% late is because they deliver with 56% fewer features than originally scoped. Now, when you contrast that with all these new digital needs that we're trying to deliver across our enterprise, the only way that we can start to get all these new capabilities, mobile, IoT, and cloud delivered quickly enough is with a new IT approach like DevOps. And what DevOps does is it integrates a few capabilities, a new culture or a new way of doing things, new practices, how do I change my IT approach, and new technologies to deliver with tremendous speed and agility. And again, all these things come straight out of open source technologies. DevOps culture is focused on how do we increase collaboration, how do we have experimentation, how do we fail fast and fail often. These all come straight out of open source culture. If you take a look at all the technologies that people use in practicing DevOps, configuration management tools like Puppet and Chef and Ansible, continuous integration systems like Jenkins and Maven, platforms as service like OpenShift. You cannot do DevOps today without using some open source technology. It's just not possible. And then finally, when you take a look at the leading practitioners of DevOps, what are they doing? They're applying DevOps in cloud and open source environments. But really interestingly also, they are also contributing back. All the leading practitioners of DevOps contribute back to open source in terms of their code, their tools, and their practices. And so as you adopt DevOps and you transform the speed at which you can deliver, it's very important, again, to focus on how do you adopt open source to do this. Now, Red Hat has a developer program and a developer portal that can help you get started along the way as you consider how do we start to implement DevOps in our own organizations. You can go to developer.redhat.com and you'll find all sorts of information, knowledge articles, as well as software that can help you start to deliver DevOps capabilities into your own environment. Now, I want to tell one more story about how a company has been implementing DevOps. But in this case, I want to tell you about ourselves, about Red Hat, because we've been practicing DevOps on our own as well. Now, a lot of you will remember last year that there was a very famous security incident called Heartbleed. Heartbleed was a vulnerability in a very fundamental security library, and many of you probably all had to log in and change your passwords at so many different sites because of this vulnerability. Now, Red Hat had a patch available for our software the moment the embargo on Heartbleed was lifted. But the other thing that we wanted to do for our customers was to be able to provide a tool to help them understand where are they vulnerable to Heartbleed. Because you probably have sitting in the corner somewhere some system that's been online for 5 years, you forgot about it, but it's running this Heartbleed exploit. How do you know that it's there? How do I know I need to patch it? So we built out an online scanning tool that you could take across your entire environment to show you which of my systems are vulnerable to Heartbleed so I know which ones to patch. And that was our Heartbleed detector. Now, one of the interesting things about this tool was that we went in 24 hours, the first line of code, all the way into production across millions and millions of systems for our production customers. Now, think about that. In the past, it would have taken us more than 24 hours just to get a server installed in our data center, let alone writing a whole application and pushing it out into production. But the reason that we were able to develop this software so quickly was because we developed an OpenShift on our cloud platform so our developers could instantly get self-service access and we could take it all the way to production in an automated way, and because our organization practiced DevOps along the way to be able to speed out the delivery of that application into production. And so you are going to have to move with the same kind of speed to satisfy your own customers, because this is what they're going to expect of you as you make that transition to the digital future. Now, I spoke a lot about the three areas around mobile, around IoT, and around cloud, and how open source is driving all this innovation across them. But how do you start to implement all these open source capabilities? This is where Red Hat can partner with you to help make you successful in this journey along the way. Red Hat is a 100% pure open source company. We do our development in the upstream communities, we drive open source projects, and then we make that open source technology safe and usable and secure and stable for enterprises. And this is how we hope to work with you. As you make this transition to the digital future, as you implement these new capabilities, you are going to have to depend in a very strategic way across open source technologies. And our mission is to take those technologies and make them safe and usable and powerful so that you can build the new kinds of capabilities you need going forward, and we can empower you to do that. Thank you very much, and we hope you have a wonderful rest of the forum. Thank you.